Welcome to For the Record. I'm Naomi Coles. Republicans in Wisconsin are getting involved in a lawsuit that's seeking to reverse a Supreme Court decision last year banning the use of drop boxes in Wisconsin for absentee ballots, among other things. Democrats filed that lawsuit, and now the Wisconsin Republican Party this week filed a motion to intervene. Joining me to discuss why they're getting involved, Executive Director Mark Jefferson. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So let's start with that big question. Why get involved with this lawsuit?
Well, the Republican Party has a lot at stake with this. Our chairman, Brian Schimming, has made it a big priority to push the early vote and absentee voting to voters throughout Wisconsin on the Republican side. We have not utilized that opportunity to the maximum effect over the years. We've done some efforts there, but we really need to take it to the next level. He's made the case repeatedly that we can't go into Election Day down hundreds of thousands of votes and expect to make that up in 13 hours. Well, we're very concerned about this case because it changes a lot of the dynamics about how we would go about that. And one of the biggest things it does is it destabilizes people's confidence in the system. If we get rid of even common sense protections so that people can feel secure that their early vote is being handled properly, if we get rid of any confidence that people have, you're going to see people not taking part in it. They're not going to want to vote early. And really, that's its own form of voter suppression. So we want to stomp that out. We want to have basic protections so that people can feel confident when they're voting early, that their vote's going to count, that people are going to handle ballots properly, and that they can feel good about the results.
Do you believe there's any safe way or secure way, then, in your view, to use drop boxes with absentee ballots?
I think over time it can be looked at, but the problem we've seen with the drop boxes so far is it's made kind of a bad reputation for itself already because it doesn't have the same type of protections that really even the mail has. I know people talk about problems with the mail, but there are federal regulations in place for anyone who tampers with the mail. Those laws do get enforced, but we've seen time and again where election officials don't necessarily enforce the law when it comes to protecting the ballot. And so if we put these drop boxes in place, which the law clearly does not allow, we do a couple things. One, we destabilize people's confidence in it because they're not necessarily as secure as people think. And two, it would take a court order basically making up its own laws. Now you've got a court system that is a second branch of the legislature, essentially, its own lawmaking branch. And at a time when we have a real crisis in confidence in our institutions, that takes it yet another step in the wrong direction.
You've mentioned a lot they have a bad reputation. Drop boxes have a bad reputation. But I have to ask, that bad reputation, conservatives have targeted drop boxes without necessarily evidence that they are actually insecure or have led to mass issues with absentee voting. I mean, a lot of that bad reputation has come from Republicans and conservatives in the 2020 election with accusations about voting that have been found by courts and multiple investigations to not have any evidence.
There have been a lot of accusations from both sides of the aisle over the years about our elections. That's true. But the fact is these drop boxes were put in place without any legal ability to do so. People were just suspending any regulations and saying, well, we have a pandemic, so we need drop boxes, we're going to have them. Well, the law didn't allow it. And the judges looked at the law and said, yeah, this may be a great idea, maybe it's not, but the law doesn't allow it, so you can't have it. So we're really starting a slippery slope here where we're just making changes to the law based on what we want it to be, rather than follow the proper procedures, which is have a bill go through the legislature, have it signed by the governor, and then you have a law change. You don't just do whatever you want when it comes to election integrity and carrying out election law.
So in that case, would Republicans back a law change to allow drop boxes in Wisconsin?
Potentially, but I think we need a little bit more study on that. What type of cameras are we going to have? How often will those be watched? Will there actually be enforcement when there are problems, or will people look the other way? We've seen time and again where the laws aren't necessarily followed in this state when it comes to indefinite confinement. When Madison did democracy in the park, which the courts have now said was not appropriate, and they say they're not going to do it again, it brings about ballot harvesting, and it opens up a whole new issue with that. Are people going to be just taking other people's ballots to those drop boxes? Now you get into the issue of the sanctity of the secret ballot. And And that is one of the things that we didn't always have in this country. You know, it wasn't until the late 1800s that a lot of states went to the secret ballot. And when they did, turnout actually decreased by 8 to 10% because people couldn't buy votes anymore. Vote buying was a problem. Well, we can laugh at that now, but there are still opportunities to mess with the system. We should take great care to avoid that from happening again. And I think this lawsuit brought on by characters from outside the state really takes us in the wrong direction.
I want to wrap this up by where you started. You started this interview talking about what Brian Schimming as the chairperson. He came in after the most recent midterm, what he's doing to kind of advance early voting in the Republican Party. And we're sitting here talking about the intervention in the lawsuit having to do with early voting. Do you fear mixed messaging here? Because there, I mean, again, as a, to remind the viewers, there's been, after the 2020 election leading up to 2022, there was very active measures from Republicans to discourage early voting.
I think that, again, a lot of that came from the fact that so many rules were being discarded in the 2020 election under the guise of, well, we have to do it because of the pandemic, so we're just going to ignore this law, we're going to ignore that law. And we're trying to get out from under that. And so part of the message of telling our people, hey, if you vote early, that means we don't have to spend resources getting you to vote. We can spend it on this person who doesn't vote in every election, but we know they'll vote Republican, and we'll get them to the polls. And it's a message that resonates, but it's a tremendous step backwards when any regulations, any common sense safeguards are removed by an activist court and brought on by lawsuits from people outside the state that come from states that don't even have same-day registration, but they'll sit here and lecture us about elections. I think it takes us a step backwards, not forward, and it's really its own form of voter suppression. We're trying to turn out more people, and we're not able to do that if they don't have faith in the system.
Mark, thank you so much for joining the show. Always good to talk to you.
Thank you for having me.